Welcome back to another episode of Casey Campbell's Videocast. I'm Casey Campbell with Great Lakes Post. We are once again joined by the MHSA Executive Director, Mark Ewell, who's been a very busy man the last few days. Of course, the MHSA announced that fall sports are planned on as scheduled unless anything changes. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know you've been on a lot of you've done a lot of interviews in the past few days since Friday's announcement. Could just kind of go in and what's everyone saying about the announcement that you guys made?
Well, good to be with you again, Casey. In the world of social media, it's fascinating to see some of the different opinions and points of view that are out there. I do think that the biggest takeaway is that some people just read the headline and they thought that we are going to play fall sports come heck or high water, and we are going to push through and play. And folks kind of missed really the biggest part of the story is, we've talked about in earlier interviews, over really the last 3 to 4 months, we have been aggressively planning for the return of school sports. One of the options that was part of our ongoing conversations and got some very serious consideration the last 2 weeks was a potential switch of seasons, taking all of our sports that are typically played in the spring, which were all skipped this past spring, taking all those sports, which are all outdoor sports, and moving those to the fall, and then taking our normal group of fall sports and then moving those to next spring. That got even more discussion after Governor Whitmer answered a question in a press conference about that concept, which we had shared with her was just one of many things that we were thinking about. Both the fall and the spring have some low-risk sports, tennis, golf. I think can be done safely and can be done safely quite easily. Both have some moderate risk sports. Soccer in both the fall and the spring would certainly be that case. And then I think you've got football in the fall and volleyball in the fall, which present some real challenges. But yet boys lacrosse in the spring present many of those same challenges. It's a close contact sport. Both would fall into the high risk category. So for swapping seasons, it wouldn't have solved all of the problems. So really what our announcement was on Friday was that the season switch or sports being played in different seasons right now, that option is coming off the table. That our plan here over the next 2.5 weeks is going to be fall sports are going to remain in the fall. That allows our school athletic directors to fine-tune fall schedules, to make sure that fall coaches have been hired and are in place and are ready to go if it's safe to play. And then families and kids can begin to plan, okay, here's what our fall might look like. There was just, and we tried to be very transparent with different ideas and concepts, and here are things we're considering. Well, the fact of the matter is we needed to give folks at least some direction, because if we were going to switch seasons, athletic directors needed some lead time to create brand new schedules for spring sports in the fall. Schools potentially would have to hire coaches, thinking that, well, my baseball coach or my lacrosse coach or my girls soccer coach retired. Well, now I've got to hire a new coach. Well, instead of having that person ready for next spring, they've now got to be ready for 2 weeks from now. So we needed to get that option off the table. And then the other, problem, if we would have flopped seasons and now we can't do anything this fall, potentially you're now taking spring sports and they're really bearing the brunt here of 2 years, of 2 seasons back to back. So our plan is fall sports in the fall. We'd love to be able to start on time, but if folks read our release or the press release a little more deeply, you understand the 3 or 4 options from there.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that I'm going to probably cover in this, but one thing is I did get some pushback on was the phase 4, phase 5, the how many people are allowed in the stadium if spectators, if a school allows spectators in the stands. When the outdoor gatherings and Governor Whitmer's executive order, for example, in phase 4, I think it's 100, and I think it's phase 5, I think it's 250, and then for indoor it's I think 50. Does that include the players and coaches as well? And did you get clarification from the governor's office on that?
We did. We actually got information that clarified that those Spectator limits are just that. They are limits for spectators. So if we're outdoors and in phase 5, and again, that number could also change. That's what the number is currently in the roadmap. But if we're able to move to phase 5, it looks like it's 250. That doesn't include the players, the officials, the coaches, the media. That if that's the scenario, each team would essentially have 125 people that they could allow in. They would need to be socially distant, but we could proceed. The biggest challenge in the fall really revolves around volleyball, to where now you're indoors, which are going to be much smaller groups. Do all volleyball matches now just become dual matches? That these large weekend invitationals with dozens and dozens of teams. Is that something that can happen under the governor's orders? But no, to make sure that everybody understands that when you hear about number limitations, that is for spectators, doesn't include participants, game workers, members of the media.
Also, I wanted to ask you about, if there are teams that have some positive cases, because there is an opportunity, there is a challenge of that, where you could have positive cases maybe throughout the season. What would happen if that would happen to a program? What could teams do?
Well, they would need to work closely with their local health department, because each county has its own health department. What we're understanding is that the guidance is those that they consider close contact. Those individuals would need to be quarantined. So it's not just the person with the positive case, but anybody that they were in close contact with would potentially need to be tested, would potentially need to be quarantined. And certainly in all sports but football. So if a team couldn't play for a week or for 10 days, then those contests would obviously not be played. The tricky part with football, of course, is not everybody gets in the postseason tournament. And something that we're going to give some consideration to here for the next 2 weeks is, if we are able to play football this fall, potentially doing something different with our tournament, maybe allowing everybody in. That way you won't have any potential gamesmanship, to where a team that maybe is already qualified for the playoffs, and instead of playing that last week, well, we have a possible COVID and we're just not going to play, which then could really put their opponent potentially behind the 8 ball. Our whole focus here should be on the health and safety of our kids. And I think, if we can come up with a solution, especially for football, to where everybody could be in the tournament, that would really take off some pressure, to make some of those in-season decisions. But again, that'll be something that we'll hopefully have a more firm plan in early August. But positive cases, because you're going to have them, certainly. It's, just building those steps of how you're going to handle that, to where hopefully you can allow school and school sports to continue on, but getting those that are ill and sick the assistance that they need.
Also, I wanted to, kind of get more into that, because there is a lot of, there are a lot of teams that travel for, not even in the regular season, not just the playoffs, but there's going to be some teams that travel from, there's the East. There are teams from the East travel to the West Side. West Side teams come over here. There's a lot of, and traveling for football and traveling for athletics is part of it. But for example, I'll use the KLA, for example, maybe a team from Brighton goes all the way up to Dearborn or something like that, or vice versa. Do you think that, do you may allow teams could play other teams in other conferences, just the area teams, even though they may be in different conferences?
So those are going to be decisions that are going to get made by each local league and by the schools involved. Being married to a Uper, I think, she might take issue with your example, Casey, of the long trip from Brighton to Dearborn. Her shortest athletic trip as a high schooler, being at Sault Ste. Marie, was an hour was a short trip. Again, but the reason I share that is probably our greatest challenge is if we get into the school year and different parts of our state are in different phases. To where, maybe a part of the state has a big step back into phase 3, to where they can't have in-person school. And if no in-person classes can be held, then it's difficult and almost impossible to have school sports. And what does a postseason tournament then look like when you're trying to match up teams and individuals who are coming to you from parts of the state that are in maybe 2 or 3 different phases in the restart plan? So those are some issues and questions that we don't have answers to today, but certainly by the week of August 10th, as we hope to get started, that's something that we'll have to have a plan of action ready to go. Could I see a scenario to where a part of our state is able to play this year and another part isn't? That's a possibility. And then in terms of the postseason, does that mean it culminates in just a regional type tournament rather than a statewide tournament? So all things that we have to keep evaluating, keep looking at. I think the biggest thing for students right now for their own mental health over the last 4 months is if we can just find a pathway to where we can get back and play. And it isn't going to be about people in the stands and how many can come watch, and doesn't include a marching band on a Friday night. And I just really think our focus is how can we get kids back to activity and competition as safely as possible.
And I want to go to with schools and setting attendance. I know that you guys have said in the past it's up to the individual school. Is it still up to the individual school?
In terms of
setting allowing fans to attend, maybe parents, student sections.
Yep.
Is it up to the school or is it up to you guys?
So the number ultimately is going to be set by Governor Whitmer's office to where how large can those outdoor and indoor events be. If there then is a limitation put on that, the schools involved would then have to split that 50-50, and whether that's a list of spectators or a pass list. We actually had schools doing this for the 36 hours last March when we thought that some of our winter tournament events could continue, but with very limited numbers of spectators. And if the number is 250, each school gets a list of no more than 125 people, and those are the only folks who can get in. We're also looking at relaxing our streaming and some of our television rules for the year, because if you are going to limit those that can attend, you want to try and make your events as accessible as possible for those that maybe are either unable or maybe have a pre-existing health condition to where they don't want to go out and even attend, that they can still be able to watch family members and friends compete.
I also want to ask you, I know there has been a big push, especially in this state and all across the country, the issue of masks. It seems to always, creep up there for some reason. So what could, I know everyone's being encouraged to wear one, and of course everyone should, but how is it going, like with volleyball and soccer? If players are on the bench, should you expect to see them with some sort of face covering on them?
That's a really good question. So what our staff is doing right now, with our announcement last week that fall sports are in the fall, is now what it's allowed us to do is to really zero in on those fall sports. And we're now creating documents that will have sport-specific guidance. So those who are actively participating in the game, what kinds of optional or additional equipment can they wear to keep themselves and others safe? Is it a case of now those players who are in uniform but not actively in the game, on the bench or on the sideline, in a volleyball match or a soccer match or a football game? It's kind of a tough sell to say, okay, well, those of you competing, you've got to wear a mask. That might be a tough sell with, say, a girl swimmer. That really doesn't make a whole lot of sense in those cases. With cross country, the one tough part about cross country and keeping kids distant is the starting area. To where do the start areas look different? Do kids actually wear a face covering when they start? And then, so as we get off the start line, the mask is on. And then after that first 50 to 100 yards, now can the mask be pulled down or dropped, or what? Again, those are all things that our staff is currently working through, because all sports are going to be different. So because of that, you're going to need to approach each of those with a little bit different strategy and game plan. And we hope to have that guidance out sport by sport of what those could potentially look like here, hopefully by the 1st of August.
Also, I kind of, looking into a lot of if a school doesn't feel comfortable with playing like if, for example, if an individual school says, I think it's too risky. I don't think we want to, risk our kids being out there and playing athletics. Can an individual school opt out of having a season?
They certainly can. They can opt out in individual sports. They could opt out for sports all the way across the board. What does make this challenging or tricky, of course, is if a school would do that, but neighboring schools are moving forward with in-person education, they're moving forward with athletics, just the local politics of that, to where now could potentially kids want to leave that school and transfer to another school that is going to offer those opportunities. If in parts of our state aren't going to have athletics, but the northern parts of our state do, you suddenly now see some families who are suddenly claiming that they're moving to Escanaba and they've sold their place back in metropolitan Detroit or Grand Rapids or Lansing. Again, all issues we'll need to kind of see where those lead us. But again, I think the hardest part, Casey, if we're not able to do anything statewide safely this fall, okay, that you can manage, and then you can try and make plans later to where then the athletic season might include a winter season, and then following the winter you'd have 2 more seasons. Some of your fall and spring sports and maybe that next season, and then a final season that might not end until the end of July. To where the one thing we do have now that we didn't have last March is some time. That, does 3 or 4 months, what now does the vaccine scenario look like? Is that the game changer in all this? But the hardest part is if activity can happen in the fall in some parts and not others, in terms of what does a tournament look like? What does regular season look like? But no, schools always have that option to opt out. But again, they've got to be careful when they do that, because if they're not having opportunity, and that's with anything, if your school doesn't have opportunities that your neighbors do, that obviously is going to be a motivating factor for a lot of kids and families. So we'll see how that plays out.
I know you're talking a lot to neighboring states, including, that was also leading into part of your decision of why you made this decision. I know that Ohio and Indiana have also said that they're going to be going on. We have not heard from Illinois, and we have not heard from Wisconsin yet. I know you've been talking to all 4 of those states. What are they saying, and where is Illinois and Wisconsin on their path of possibly deciding?
So they're following a similar process that us in Indiana and Ohio have followed. I know that they are making plans, and they should have announcements here very soon. While I'm not going to, share with what has been shared with me, I can just say in general, I don't think that either of those states are going to do anything that's drastically different than what some of the other states are doing. So it's not just those 4 surrounding states, but it's also been lots of conversations with our colleges here in Michigan. Not just the Big Ten and the MAC, but to me, more specifically, what's the GLIAC thinking? Because there you've got 2 UP schools in Michigan Tech and Northern Michigan that both play football, as well as some downstate schools. You got Wayne State, who again, right downtown Detroit, middle of the pandemic epicenter in our state. And then you've got Grand Valley, which gives you a pretty good barometer on Grand Rapids and Ferris State. And then you've got Saginaw Valley and Northwood. I think all very, very instructive in terms of what our small colleges are thinking. In the same way with the MIAA, our Division III schools, and even our NAIA schools in Michigan that play football and play volleyball in the fall. Because, I think if we get to a point to where it's not safe to play football, I think all those levels and all those states are going to be making those decisions as well as volleyball. So right now it's a lot of information sharing back and forth. And I know that all of us are going to have to make some very definite decisions here as August 1 gets closer. And part of that is why we're reconvening our board of directors next week, Wednesday, just to check in again. Hopefully we'll have a little bit better of what August might look like. Maybe we'll get a little bit better sense of what government direction is coming in terms of the start of school and then school sports. And that way, again, we're able to report out at least a week before practices begin, and we'll see where that leads us.
And Ohio is also planning on their, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they're starting August 1st. I'm not sure when Indiana is starting. But if they start seeing, if you start seeing things and it's likely positive, there really isn't many cases from there, will that help you in your decision of whether, okay, maybe we need to hold back or maybe we can go forward? Because I think Ohio and Indiana start practice before you guys do.
They do, and so certainly that could be helpful. But yet, I think the other thing is right now there are thousands of kids who are working out and conditioning every day with school people. There are thousands of kids who are playing non-school summer travel baseball and softball and keep filling in the blanks. And we're not seeing these huge spikes within these summer youth programs that, to be honest, in some respects, are happening illegally based on the governor's executive orders and direction. But and I think that's also telling, because when people run sports to where it's their livelihood, you're gonna make decisions a little bit differently. That, you know what, are we taking a risk by having that 24 team summer baseball tournament this weekend? Probably. But if we don't have that, then the $10,000 plus of revenue that generates with entry fees and those things. So you see the non-school world who are making decisions probably a little bit different than we are. I truly believe that if parents really are concerned about school sports and how can we return to sports as safely as possible, the safest place where that's going to happen is in schools. Because you've got professional educators to where this is their career. They're not just volunteers, to where they're going to do everything possible to make sure that kids in buildings or kids returning to sports is going to be done as safely and as smartly as it can possibly be done. It just, Casey, it changes when money is involved and when it's people's livelihoods, to where they've now got to make financial decisions and health decisions. That's why we're going to try and be as safely aggressive as we can, because we really believe that the school space is the safest place for that activity to get its restart.
There's also a lot of kids are excited, but a lot of kids are also concerned that there may not be fall sports. What's your overall message to all high school kids in Michigan?
It's this, unfortunately, I wish I had I wish there was this secret phone that was, read here in my office where I was getting all this inside information, which I'm not. It's really been what I think, Casey, every person, not just in our country, but probably in the world, has done the last 4 months. The advice I would give is just continue to hang in there. Even if we aren't able to have sports this fall, that, the data and the numbers trend in a negative direction over the next 2.5 weeks, hang in there. If we have to get creative of what the back end of the school year looks like, to where sports might start with winter sports followed by some combination of fall and spring, hang in there. I'm very in touch with this on a daily basis, because in my house, I've got my middle child is a 3-sport athlete, and he's going to be a senior. So this isn't just an administrator who maybe isn't has kind of lost their close touch with what families are really experiencing with this. I'm seeing that firsthand in my own house, and I'm encouraging my son to just hang in there, to keep working, to when the window of opportunity to play presents itself, you've got to be ready. So hang in there, be ready, continue to hope that, after 4 months of really very little positive signs or news, that we just have to keep hoping and praying here that that window of opportunity will open to us. So that message is just continue to hang in there and be ready.
All right. Mark, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. And I'm sure we're going to be talking to you again probably next week, because it just keeps coming up as that August 10th date gets closer and closer and closer. Mark, thank you so much. We'll talk to you once again, maybe probably next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, Casey.